Good morning, friends. Welcome back to the Westport Library. I got to tell you, I'm disappointed in the wise men for not bringing donuts. Even though it's the afternoon, it's always time for donuts. Let's just remember that the next time in 4 years. I'm Bill Harmer, the Executive Director of the Westport Library. Again, we're delighted that so many of you turned out this morning. Thank you so much for being here. This afternoon, we are pleased to bring you the second of our 2 gubernatorial forums. None of this would have been possible without our good friends at the Wise Men of Weston and Westport. And again, the library is proud to play host. It is my distinct pleasure to once again introduce and welcome to the podium Wise Men President Baxter Ulris, who will tee up today's program.
Thank you. Thanks, Bill. Well, who are the wise men? Oh, first off, I have to say, good afternoon, wise men. That's a secret handshake thing we have. The wise men are a group of retired and semi-retired men who live in Westport and Weston. It's a 45-year-old organization. We have 400 plus members, and we have 25 different activities that we have. Everything from arguing about international politics, which is online, so we don't really get violent. But the activities are to keep us young, mentally and physically, and they range from, of course, golfing, tennis, hiking, chess, book clubs, photography. And besides those activities, every Thursday from September to May, we have a meeting at the Saugatuck Congregational Church, and we have speakers come in to speak with us on a variety of topics, everything from current events to history. And we even, in a couple of weeks, we're going to have Marty Yellen on October 20th, who is a wise man, and he was one of the creators of the Hubble telescope. And he's going to talk to us about the universe and what they've learned both from the Webb telescope as well as the Hubble. Truth be known, he prefers the Hubble telescope. But he's going to answer some small questions like, how big is the universe? How old is the universe? How did it begin? And the best one is, how will it end? We're meeting today here because thanks to our speaker committee, and also and one of the members is Pete Walgast, and he suggested when we were trying to figure out who should speak to us this coming year, we thought, well, why don't we get the gubernatorial candidates to come speak to us? And we said, well, that would be great, but we should open it up to the entire Westport Weston community, and that's why we've partnered with the library here today, which is just terrific. The format for today is pretty straightforward. Both this format is exactly the same as we had for Bob Stefanowski last week, and that is that the candidates will speak to us for 10 or 15 minutes, and then Jim Marpy, our past first selectman, will ask the candidate questions that the wise men have made up. We don't have time with the governor to open it up to questions from the floor, but we have some pretty good questions. Of course, one of them is about traffic. So if you'd also hold your applause till the end, if the governor makes a point you really like, just hold your clap, just don't clap. And now I'd like to introduce Jen Tooker, our first select woman, to welcome you to Westport.
Thank you, Baxter. Good afternoon. This is usually the death slot from a speaker standpoint, right? 1 o'clock in the afternoon, I know, as somebody who speaks in front of crowds frequently, this is the slot you never want. It's all about food coma. It's all about trying to keep people engaged and awake. But I know today this crowd is super engaged. And as I said last week, and as I said many times before to this community, we are a community of people who care deeply about issues that affect us locally and at the state level and at the national level. And I know today will be a lively discussion because of you all being here. And thank you for being here. Welcome to Westport, for those of you who are not from Westport, and a huge thank you to the library and the Wiseman for putting this on. We're very grateful. This is exactly what Westport is about. So thank you.
I have a question. Is the governor here? I guess he's not here yet. Yes, he's here. Sorry. Well, to introduce the governor is a Staples graduate, Will Haskell. You all know Will. He's represented you in the state. You can, of course, applaud for Will Haskell. But because he's in law school during a class right now, he's going to introduce the governor virtually. So here's Will.
Hi there, my name is Will Haskell and I represent Westport in the Connecticut State Senate. I'm so sorry that I can't be with all of you today, but I did not want to miss this opportunity to say just a few words about my friend and our governor, Ned Lamont. About 4 years ago, I was elected to the state Senate and I walked into the state capitol feeling incredibly intimidated. You see, from holding hearings to passing laws, I was wholly unfamiliar with the way things were supposed to be done up there. Luckily, that put me in really good company. You see, there was somebody else who was new to the building that year, and as soon as he got there, Governor Lamont implemented an open-door policy, meaning that any legislator from any political party in any part of the state could knock on his door to have a conversation. I decided to take him up on it more than a few times, and I found somebody who was really excited to innovate. I found in Governor Lamont a person who wanted to shake things up because he knew that the status quo, or the way things were supposed to be done up there, it didn't actually work out all that well for a lot of people. Over the last 4 years, I've had the chance to work alongside Governor Lamont on making this state work better for everybody. Together, we made community college free for Connecticut residents, and we passed tax credits to reduce student loan debt. He led the way on addressing our pension crisis, making sure that we used increased tax revenue to pay down our debt and save money for the next generation of taxpayers. And I'm not just talking about saving them a little bit of money. His bulk payment is already saving us more than $400 million each year. He cut taxes for retirees. He limited the amount of taxes that we pay on motor vehicles. He helped to pass some of the strongest gun laws in the country. And perhaps most importantly for this political moment, he didn't wait for the Supreme Court to overturn Roe v. Wade. He saw that threat coming, and he preemptively signed one of the strongest laws in the country to make sure that our state is always a sanctuary for people who want the full spectrum of reproductive health care options. Let me just close by telling you why I'm voting for Ned Lamont this November. I've been by this governor's side through fights that we've won and for fights that we've lost, and I think it would be a mistake to judge him, or anyone really, just on the victories. Yes, Ned Lamont's had a remarkably productive term, but when I walk into the voting booth, what motivates me is all the work that remains. Governor Lamont has had to grapple, as you'll remember, with a global pandemic and the worst recession since the Great Depression. And he's done an exceptional job, but I know that he's really looking forward to re-engaging an agenda that necessarily had to be sidelined when we all had to stay home. For example, he proposed new laws that would keep guns out of dangerous hands, and I want to see those laws finally pass the Judiciary Committee. He and I have worked together to make it easier for Connecticut residents to purchase an electric vehicle, and we've got to get that effort across the finish line. His administration has put forward ideas that would reduce the cost of healthcare by allowing the importation of safe prescription drugs from Canada and reduce the cost of energy by bringing greater transparency into the marketplace. And perhaps most importantly for Westport, Governor Lamont launched the Time for Connecticut plan, a multi-billion-dollar effort that would finally speed up Metro North, and that effort must continue. Ned Lamont doesn't lose time worrying about the way things are supposed to be done because he's got some ideas, actual ideas for how we can do them better. He does not back away ever from a tough fight, and I know he's got plans to make the state continue to work better for everybody. I am so proud to call Ned Lamont my friend, and I think we all should be proud to call him our governor. I hope that you'll join me in giving Ned Lamont a very warm welcome today.
Hey, wise man, how are you? Guy's 25 years old and he's already retired, that Will Haskell. Not only is he retired, he's written his memoirs. We could do this every 5 years for the next 40 years, Will. He was a real asset for me and for Westport, and I really hope he comes back. Anyway, I love being back in Westport. As Jen and Jim know, yeah, I love this town. This is where I met my wife, Annie. I used to take her on a windsurfer over to Longshore. That was kind of romantic at the time. And used to go here. We used to go down to a place called Ships. Do you remember Ships, anybody? Yeah. Now it's Tiffany's. I think maybe she wishes it was Tiffany's back then. But I used to play squash across the way. So this is a state that Annie and I have loved forever. And it was a state that I thought was really going through some tough times. I was looking back 5 years ago. We hadn't added a new job in 30 years, and all the cool kids were moving down to the Big Apple or Boston. And they used to say we're lurching from fiscal crisis to fiscal crisis. And then GE left, last one out, turn out the lights, and we were all a little down on ourselves. And it was at that point that I said, I think we can do a lot better than that. I'm gonna give it a shot. You haven't had a business guy leading the state, virtually forever, so I think we gotta get going. And I looked around, and what's the first thing you gotta do? I thought we had to get our fiscal house in order. It was a friggin' mess. Everybody knew about the fixed costs, you knew about the deficits. So we inherited something that looked like $2 billion deficits a year as far as the eye could see. And we can talk a little bit about what we did, but we held the line on spending. And the first governor in 40 years not to raise income taxes. That was sort of a go-to default position that I think was no good for anybody, created a certain sense of pessimism here in this state. I think people noticed. Our rating agencies gave us a thumbs up. A lot of new companies were taking a second look at Connecticut. And then, as you remember, when COVID hit. And that was like a body blow. We were hit hard, probably remember. It was New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut. And you could hear a pin drop. And you can ask questions about how we managed through that, but we managed through it together. We hung together as a state. We were more likely to get tested, more likely to get vaccinated, less likely to get infected in just about any state after those first 4 hellacious months. We got our schools open faster than anybody. We kept our parks and beaches open. And something remarkable started to happen. We had more visitors to the state of Connecticut in 2020, 2021 than we've ever had before. Kept our golf courses open. Kept manufacturing open. We kept construction open. We tried to keep things going as best we could. Restaurants, a little tougher, but we started by outdoor dining. And everybody said, oh boy, that's gonna be tough. You know what happened? People began saying, hey, downtown Westport on Thursday evening is really pretty cool. Look at all the people hanging outside. People began noticing. People began getting a second look at the state of Connecticut. And something else happened. We had tens of thousands of new families start moving into the state of Connecticut as opposed to the other direction. Tens of thousands of new families. And that meant a lot of new jobs. That meant rejuvenating our schools. And obviously a lot here in Fairfield County up to Merritt 7. all down the Naugatuck Valley where people hadn't moved in quite some time, really all over the state. I think it was sort of a little bit of energy that manufactured where we're going to be as a future as a state. And so coming out of COVID, look, we barely balanced the budget that first year. We had a little more of a balance the next year. And then the last 2 years, we've had, not only a balanced budget, but a surplus. And there's a little bit of debate about what you do with the surplus. Usually, previous governors in our boom and bust cycle would just, send all the money back. Well, I want to do everything I could to get people back to work. That was my number 1, 2, and 3 priority. Get people back to work, get this economy moving again. So I did a couple of things. One, we had the biggest expansion of daycare and childcare in the history of the state. Make it a little easier for that kid to get a running head start in life, especially after the COVID years, and make it easier for mom and dad to get back to work. We provided workforce, free workforce. So we have 113,000 jobs in the state we can't fill. We'd have 0% unemployment, less than that, if I could get people back to work. And we did something else that, Jim supported, but not everybody supported. I wanted to start paying down our pension obligations. That was not a big hit. It's not something you go back to Milford and say, I voted to start paying down our pension debt, but we had one of the most unfunded liabilities in the country. And we've paid down almost $6 billion in pension debt. We've gone from 35% funded to closer to 50% funded, although we'll see what happens with the market this year. Made an enormous difference. And you know what else it said? It's going to save us taxpayers' dollars about $450 million a year for the foreseeable future. $450 million a year. So rather than add to our credit card debt, we did just the opposite, started paying down our debt. And now, what I want to do for the next 4 years is keep up that extraordinary momentum. And it starts with a couple of things. One, this is an opportunity to lift everybody up. I need people getting back to work. Nobody's left behind. You want to get a job, you want to be a laser welder, I can give you a 16-week program, you'll be a laser welder, EB will hire you $70,000 a year, and I can guarantee you a job. A lot of states are saying, hey, I'll pay you $10,000 if you move into my state. I'm not that type of guy. I'm not into giving away money, but I am into giving away opportunity. And this is a time for people to have that opportunity. We're desperate for teachers. We're desperate for nurses. We're desperate for state policemen, although I've added on an extra class of state police every time I've been here. These are all the jobs we need. And every single business I talk to, and I talk to them every day, tell me the same thing. That is workforce. Will I be able to get the people I need? Well, is there housing for single folks? Because not everybody's got 2.1 kids in a house in the suburbs. Is there a place for them to stay as well? That's what I hear from business. And the good news is we've had dozens of major businesses move into the state of Connecticut. But more importantly is the hundreds of businesses that are starting up here in this state. So that's what I'm trying to do for the next 4 years. My friend Will Haskell said, we got some old infrastructure. I don't know what everybody did for the last 50 years, but they certainly didn't invest in infrastructure. And it's not very flashy, but one of the things we're doing is speeding up our transportation system, doing that with some help from the federal government. But we still have to put up 20 to 30% ourselves. I'll be able to take 15, 20 minutes off your commute from Westport, Stamford, down to Grand Central Station. We do that by fixing up our bridges, doing that right now. We're major investments in our airports to make sure that our strategic location is an advantage and not a disadvantage going forward. So anyway, I'm pretty positive about this state. We've come a long way. We got a long way to go. Ted Lasso, does that guy ring a bell with you? Well, they started calling me Ned Lasso. And I kind of like it because I believe in this state and I hope you do as well. What do we do next, Jim?
I'm going to ask you some questions.
That sounds like fun.
Have a seat. First of all, thank you, Governor, for being here today, and with the busy schedule that I know you have, we are honored to have you here in our presence. I think the last time you and I were in this building was the day you came to help us dedicate this rebuilt and reimagined library. So thank you for that and the attention you've paid to that. So I'm going to start off here with, these are all questions that, as was pointed out earlier, for the most part have been submitted by members of the Wise Men, and we've distilled them down a little bit, and maybe I took a little editorial license along the way, but I think you'll understand. So let's start with an easy one. What actions will you take When your counterparts in Florida and Texas send 2 planes full of migrants to Bradley Airport and 4 buses of migrants to the transportation center in Stamford? And what are you encouraging President Biden to do about that migrant problem?
One, secure the border. You've got to secure the border. I think you got to be very clear about that. Secure that border and then have a big door for legal immigration. Don't get the two confused. I think right now the federal government is getting those confused. And no offense, Jim, but I can't stand what they're doing, sending these migrants up here, playing games with these young people. And these are Venezuelans fleeing a totalitarian government down there, coming up with the necessary permissions. That's what America's been about for a long time. So to your question, I've got some hotel space. We're ready to go. Nobody's asked us to do anything as yet, but we will be standing by. I think it's the right thing to do. Mm-hmm. And I did the same thing for some of the Afghani refugees coming into this state as well. Mm-hmm.
In your opening remarks, you referenced actually one of the questions that I asked the other day to your opponent, and I'll ask you. I think you were at a conference at Yale where they talked about one of the challenges of our economic challenges is the workforce, as you pointed out, and that coupled with that then is affordable housing, and not just for all classes of people, middle class as well as working class. And the challenge here and how this fits into the legislation that we all shorthand as 830G, and how do we create affordable housing that isn't always necessarily dense and 5 stories high and 100 bedrooms, and yeah, maybe has those 1 and 2 bedroom, those studios and 1 bedrooms you talked about, but also that invites families, which I think the original 830G legislation was intended to foster.
Do it the way you and Jen do it. Do it with local control. Let you take the lead. To back up a little bit, Jim was talking about we had all the business leaders together 10 days ago at Yale, and I said the number 1 issue confronting the state is workforce, and they said it's housing. They said we need places for young people to live. If I don't have a place for young people to live, I can't locate my business here. We need places for teachers, firemen, cops to be able to be in the town they are. I'm down in Greenwich, on weekends, and when I was a selectman, all of the teachers, firemen, and cops lived in town. Now virtually none of them do. So, but I'm a strong believer in local control. But I like the fact, I think Westport just put in place a plan, maybe, and my feeling is, look, you come up with a plan, you tell us how you get housing, not just affordable housing, but a variety of different housing. You say this is where it would work, and you're free. There's no 830G. You get a moratorium, I think. But if you refuse to come up with a plan, I'm afraid 830G is still there in the backdrop.
Yeah, and you're correct. We have recently developed a plan which seemed to get pretty high marks as it's being reviewed around the state. So thank you for that. As long as you mentioned me and my successor, Jen Tooker, while you and I represent different political parties, I truly believe you and I have had a cordial and, more importantly, productive relationship, and I think you have the same with Jen. Unfortunately, I don't think that's the situation, and I'm not picking on you per se, but around the state, certainly between states, and certainly at the federal level. How do we change the tone of the discussion? How do we get people working together so it's not just Republicans, Democrats, but the increasingly independent sector that wants none of those houses? Thank you.
Well, I've tried. I like mayors. I don't care what their political party is. They got to get stuff done. I like people who want to get things done. And that's what I love about being a governor. It's something, I wouldn't be a very good legislator, and I think sometimes they're more interested in scoring points than getting things done. But Will, I think I got to listen there. I've tried to change the tone in Hartford, and I've had some success, some mixed success. But he's absolutely right. I wanted to open the door. I want to make sure the very best ideas came to the table and that we could work together. And we got a lot done. The crime bill, we did that on a bipartisan basis. The mental health bill, we did that on a bipartisan basis. They didn't like my first budget very much, but we got our second budget done on a bipartisan basis. So there are things you can do if you listen and you try and work together. And obviously in Washington, D.C., it's a lot more poison than that. They're just so terrified of a primary. One of the things I've noticed is everybody's pretty normal behind closed doors. But as soon as you go out there and the camera's on, they go right back to type. And I've tried to do everything I could to be able to make sure people know what they say to me stays with me, it stays private, and we work together collegially on this. I think we're making progress. We've got a long way to go.
Thank you. You also talked about transportation, and in combination with getting workforce here, we have to get them to work. Your remarks seemed as I was hearing them, was talking about train transportation for the most part. But really, I think for a lot of the people in this room, it's the 10 miles between here and Stamford on I-95 and or the Merritt Parkway and or all the other roads that Waze sends us to now that are the real issues. How do we improve that within the foreseeable future?
Well, as I alluded to,
by the way, and are there tolls involved in that process? And
anyway, that was an idea I had because there was absolutely no money in the transportation fund, and we had to do something to fix our roads and bridges. And now, given the price of gasoline, and I have a small fee, or I don't think the truckers would call it that small, but a fee on those big tractor-trailer trucks going through the state. We don't need tolls, and I think I can keep the price of gasoline down, or at least not have to increase all the gas taxes. I think that's a big plus. Here's the deal on transportation. I mean, there was sort of a misnomer out there. Oh my God, we have to build another lane on I-95. Nonsense. I look at all these heat maps. They're really very interesting. You can see there are 4 or 5 big congestion points on I-95, generally relating an exit or an ingress. That's where everything slows up to a crawl. So if I can get a little longer exit ramp there, we can really take down another 10 or 15 minutes off your commute. Just like by replacing those bridges, we can do the same thing on rail service as well. And what we got out of the infrastructure bill, transportation bill coming out of Washington, D.C., is about $700 or $800 million a year extra. So everybody says, yippee, we got all the money we need. We don't have to do anything in the state. They're competitive grants, so I have to come up with 20 or 30% to do that. But we can speed up rail, and we can speed up driving transportation dramatically. And we'll also see, we're also doing the biggest expansion of broadband. You're pretty good here in Westport on broadband, but some of the more urban areas or some of the more rural areas, broadband's terrible. If that takes 10% of the cars off the road, because people say, hey, I go to New York, I don't have to go there, or I can go to Stanford, I don't have to go there every day, maybe twice a week, that will help a lot as well. I think we're going to be able to make real progress on that, Jim.
In your reference to the gas tax, I know that was also a step to try and combat inflation. What other steps do you think you can be taking, or the state should be taking, to help all of us who are now challenged by increasing inflation here?
Yeah, the inflation was brutal, especially last summer, especially when you saw gas prices. I spent my second and third year just looking at the COVID infection rates every hour like a stock watcher, right? And then I spent the last year looking at the price of gasoline, up. Now it's coming down a little bit. Look, I can't control Putin. I can't control worldwide inflation, but I can do things to make Connecticut a little more affordable. So because we got our fiscal house more in order than we had it before, we're able to put in place the biggest middle-class tax cut in the history of the state. And that was money that I didn't want to have to wait till next year on April 15th. I wanted this to be money right now. What it meant for, maybe some of your children or grandchildren, a child tax rebate, so they got, say, $1,000 before the kids came back to school. What it meant for seniors was eliminate the income tax for everybody on their 401ks, on their pension plans, making life just a little more supportable going forward. I'm a big believer in the earned income tax credit. I want to do everything I can to get people back to work. So people talk about eliminating the income tax. I've eliminated it for anybody earning up to about $60,000 a year. Get off the couch, get back to work, and we're going to make it worth your while. So we've got a way to go, but I think we're making real progress. And I've been very conservative on our budgeting, by the way, because we are running into a recessionary headwind. So I'm not going to make a lot of big promises, but I think there are some other significant savings we'll be able to have on the spending side and pass that along to the taxpayer going forward.
In terms of the economy, your question was submitted and rang a bell to me. Your predecessor invested, I think, a fair amount in what the questioner referred to as bioscience at UConn and that whole environment of genetics and so forth related to that. Where does that stand vis-a-vis the other, and what are the other priority industries that you're looking at to attract and obviously retain in Connecticut?
Yeah, we were great in the old industries, and then we failed to innovate, and the most entrepreneurial state in the country fell flat a little bit. I think we're on the cutting edge again of a lot of the next generation. Down in this neck of the woods, it's not finance, it's fintech. And what that means, you know, the largest, I know they're out of favor right now, but the digital currency company in the country is located right in Stamford. So the old UBS is morphing into where we got to go. Mm-hmm. You mentioned a bioscience and life science. Look, I'm not, my predecessors love to hand out hundreds of millions of dollars. Please locate here. Mm-hmm. That's not the way I'm doing it. But we have had about 50 or 60 real startups in that area. Pfizer just bought a company in New Haven. AstraZeneca just bought a company. They're coming back. The greater New Haven area not only has, you know, Yale medicine, epidemiology, and the such. We're about half the size of Boston. Boston is great, wonderful, but it's a lot less expensive to do it in the greater New Haven area. That's going to be a big piece of our engine of growth going forward. And finally, I'd say advanced manufacturing. We are building more submarines and helicopters and F-35 jet engines than ever before. I'm not saying we're recession-proof, we're much better positioned than other states, provided I can get them the workforce. So I think you see three big buckets where Connecticut is very well positioned for this century.
Change the topic here a little bit. On this same stage last week, your opponent, Bob Stefanowski, noted an almost, by my calculation, about 300% overrun on the cost of building the State Pier in New London that relates to what I think is a very good initiative, wind energy. His concern seems to be in part that the overrun, and it's in the hundreds of millions of dollars if I understand it correctly, is being shouldered by the state and not Ørsted and Eversource, who are the private parties that will benefit from this. Your response to that?
Yeah, I heard something about that. First of all, it's one of the most important investments this state has made in 50 years. That State Pier, which is owned by not Ørsted, not Eversource, owned by the state of Connecticut, is going to be transformative. Those same utilities are paying us rent, so we'll be able to build out wind power over the next, not just 10 years, but 20 years, and they also pay us rent on that. So as part of the negotiation, we said, look, we want you to contribute to the building of this pier, so they contributed $75 million. I like public-private partnerships. I don't think government has all the answers, so I'm happy to have done that alongside of these folks. Time is money. You know, there were lawsuits and, you know, it was delayed 3 years for a variety of reasons. We had to reposition the pier. So you're right, the cost did go up. The cost did go up a lot, but I hate the implication that the cost went up because everybody's either corrupt or stupid. I just don't think that's fair at all. Time is money. It took a little longer than we need to do. It's going to be extraordinary, and thankfully I got the private sector paying for a significant piece of this.
As long as we're talking about an energy, clean energy related initiative, could you talk a little bit more about whatever other initiatives you might have in that category?
Yeah. Our energy is expensive. You know why? We're at the very end of everything. And with the high price of natural gas, you know, we have to bring it in by ship because they won't let us bring it in by pipe. We got some of the cheapest natural gas in the world right there in Pennsylvania, but I can't get it to Connecticut. It's got to go here by boat. So if I learned anything during COVID is do everything you can to own your own supply chain so you're not totally dependent upon others. So the first thing, you know, I did going forward is we had to figure out what to do with Millstone, which is our nuclear power plant. And you probably noticed Germany and California were shutting down nuclear power plants. I made a new 10-year agreement with them at 5 cents a kilowatt hour. A little risky, gave them a guaranteed price. So we're in good supply when it comes to what we got to do there. Now I need to keep filling in. You know, wind power is going to be significant. I don't know if any of you guys are sailors, but you go out in the Long Island Sound, you go, what's with wind power? This is a dead calm in August. But believe it or not, off the Long Island coast, you know, we're like the Saudi Arabia of wind. So we're very well positioned to make more and more of our power wind. And if I could do one more thing, and Steinberg is very helpful on this as well, is get the hydropower coming down from Quebec. We're having a hard time. They won't let us build transmission lines. We can talk about that. Those would be the three big pieces of the puzzle. And the environmental piece of this is, look, our electric grid is, almost all carbon free now. Over the next 10, 15 years, I think it will be carbon free for the reasons I said. It's our transportation sector, which is the source of a lot of our greenhouse, a lot of our asthma, a lot of our risk. And we're going to have probably 500 charging stations built along, 95, 91, 84. So any of you thinking about getting your all-electric vehicle, but you have range anxiety, we'll be able to help out with that. And I think you're going to see real transition over the next 10 years.
Well, speaking of electric grid, that reminds me that it was just a little over 2 years ago that you and I and an entourage of elected leaders were standing on a couple of our roads here in Westport in awe of what had taken place with Storm Isaias. Give us your sense of progress in hardening the electric grid that goes that last mile, not necessarily particularly here in Westport, but overall, what have we done to ensure power flows, and when it does get interrupted, is returned more quickly?
Yeah, so that was brutal. And, number of people lost power, how long they lost power. I was outraged, and Eversource did not plan accordingly. And we fined them $200 million, and we said, for here on out, regulation is performance-based. I'm not giving you any automatic rate of return with performance like that. And truth be told, I think we haven't been hit by the same type of storms, but they've been much better prepared going forward. Everybody, I hear two things. I came out of the telecommunications world, so I noticed that bury the wires, right? Wouldn't that be great? Then there are no limbs that fall and our power goes forever. We are ledged, so that would just be dramatically expensive. But they do have this really antique, I told you everything in the state is antique, a grid system right now. So when a tree comes down, they can't tell whether the power is on or off in that. So they're putting in remote status monitoring. We'll be able to get the folks there a lot faster to take care of things, going forward. Biggest expansion of broadband we've ever had. And we're doing everything we can to harden the electric grid. And the other thing we do, and I know I'm getting a little boring for a Monday afternoon, but so you can segment it. So if you can't go this way, you'll be able to go that way. That's the way we do it in telecommunications, and they're headed that way with electric as well. I think we're making progress there, but I'm afraid it's not ever going to be the cheapest electricity, but it's going to be clean and consistent electricity. And right now, we're a lot more stable than our neighboring states. One last thing on that. Their prices go like this, right? Because they buy everything on the spot market. We don't do that. I told you we have fixed costs from, for example, on the nuclear power. So New Hampshire prices just doubled on electricity. We do have the lowest electricity prices in New England right now. One of the reasons is we buy in the forward market. So, we don't go like this. We go like this depending on what happens. So I think we're better positioned than we were before.
I'm mindful of the fact that you are on a tight schedule, and the reason, in part, you're here is because there's an upcoming election. So I'm going to wrap up with a question of whether you have any specific concerns about the statewide or local election processes in Connecticut, and if so, how would you address them in the future?
I don't have any great concerns. Look, we have a really good electoral system, and it's got integrity. And I don't want anybody telling you otherwise. If I wanted to make some adjustments, I'll tell you I would do a couple things. One, there's something called ranked choice voting. So I'm tired of somebody with 35% of the vote appealing to an extreme wing of his or her party, getting the nomination, and the other 65% is sort of locked out a little bit. So ranked choice voting would be if somebody doesn't get 50%, the fourth place finisher says, this is how I do it. I think John McKinney knows something about what I'm saying there. I do something else, though, too. I want your legislators to represent not just a suburban town. I want our urban legislators not just to represent urban or small town. I want our districts to be right angles, so everybody has to make the same type of choices as I do. How would it affect the city? How would it affect the suburb? So that would bring a little more purple, a little less red and blue. We've gotten more red and blue the last few years.
Governor Lamont, thank you very much for being here today.
You're all so quiet. We doing okay? I mean, the state's doing okay, guys. Come on, I love you. Thanks, Jim. Thanks. You're a good man.